All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Doug Tiffin. I work for Amazon Web Services. I oversee the global business development for apparel and fashion, and I'm here with Paul Fryer, who is our global lead for solution architecture for retail. So today, we're going to talk about some of the big changes in retail, and then talk about how retailers can prepare themselves to better innovate and be quick in the future. So let's talk about it for a second. So let's go back in time a little bit to just before the pandemic happened. I want to set the stage. This is e-commerce growth as a percent to the total retailer business. So very normal curve here. Every year we were adding on a little bit more and a little bit more. E-commerce kept growing and growing and growing. And we get to the end of 2019 and then we hit 2020 and then the coronavirus hit and the pandemic began. And then retailers experienced what I call the great acceleration, and that was the acceleration of digital adoption. People were at home and they did not have a choice but to shop online. So this is a United States statistic, but I would argue it's similar around the world. In the first quarter of 2020, e-commerce business jumped 20%. 43%. So it's driven by the fact that customers really didn't have a choice. They had to shop online or not shop at all at first. And then as retail stores began to operate at a minimal level, they had new options. They could shop on store, but they could still just pick it up at the curb, have it delivered to their house, etc. So customers quickly started adopting change. And this was a real critical time because most stores were not operational. They just had a few people mining the online orders. And like in the United States, it was like 50,000 stores were closed. So it was a really interesting time. Retailers were forced to go to the drawing board and innovate. How do we work in this new environment? And what's great is all of us that are retailers know this. When the pressure's on, that's when we work best. And so retailers innovated so that they could continue to drive business. So this is just a snapshot of how quickly things change. So this is a United States statistic. Again, I think there's similarities across the globe. But it's actually pretty incredible. Like most of the technologies here or the services here, like buy online, pick up in store, or buy online, have home delivery, it doubled. Like the number of retailers that adopted the technologies doubled. And I'll tell you firsthand, some of it was painful for some retailers that really weren't ready for it, so they ended up having to do a lot of things manually. But then others were prepared and they were able to adapt really quickly. And by middle of 2020, they were doing it. So with the digital adoption, things radically changed for retailers and how they think about their digital businesses. So you can see some of these statistics up here, and I'll let you read them, but there's some behind the scenes. You have to pay attention to this new digital customer. 70% of what they drive, let's see, what was the statistic? Around 70% of the time they're going to buy something. They make up, at least, I want to say it was, at this point, you're talking about 20 or 30% of the business, and 34% of the time they're actually buying more than consumers that are going to brick and mortar stores. So these customers are really important to your business. They're also more finicky. 40% of them actually switched brands. If they had a loyal brand, they actually moved on to somebody else. They got a lot more picky about if the website wasn't performing well, they just go find another one because they were discovering that there was a lot more brands in the world than the ones that had been focused on where they didn't have a ton of time to go and look around on the internet. So what does that really mean? What does that mean to retailers today? That means the path to purchase is different than ever before. If you go back before the pandemic, things were kind of straightforward, right? It was digital business and store business and a little bit of crossover as people were starting to do the buy online, pick up in store. But even retailers were still siloed in the way that they were organized. There was an e-commerce team, there was a store team, and they didn't always get along. but the world has changed. Like the relationship between digital and physical stores is it's a complicated marriage is the way I would look at it. But the customer, before they ultimately may make a purchase, could go to a lot of different things, and you can see them listed here. If you were at our talk yesterday, you heard a lot about live streaming. In China, that's one of the hottest ways to move product. But there's so many other ways the customer can interact. You know, there's social, there's direct mail, email, there's the visits to the store. And if you're looking at that little bubble there that says community chat and private channel, private traffic, that's what China's doing now. That's the next wave. And I give it a couple years before it comes here, but that's a new type of customer engagement where it's two-way, where the retail opens a two-way conversation, kind of related to live streaming where you get instant feedback, except for it's on a much bigger scale. And artificial intelligence actually listens in and watches for customer sentiment and understanding what customers are talking about. So, not here yet, but it's coming. So ultimately, the key here is data. You want to understand what the consumer is doing all along the journey, understanding what they're looking at, what they're attracted to, what they're not looking at, so that you're able to take advantage of that information and market to them more effectively and more directly so to encourage them to purchase. So in this grand scheme of things, in the new digital shopping path or the new path to purchase, my argument would be that data is going to be your most critical element that you get along the way. So with all this innovation that retail has done, retailers, like I said, we get really creative when the times are rough. That's raised the bar now. Customers now expect this, right? They expect you to know them across channels. They want, when you market to them, they want you to be marketing what they prefer and not throw them random items. If they know that I like colorful sport coats, then don't show me real boring ones. You know that, because customers get upset about it. They will turn you off, so to speak. But there's a collision course here, right? Because there's this growing concern about privacy and how do you use my data? And I was at a conference 2 weeks ago in Las Vegas, and there was a CEO of a real popular subscription service. It was like Stitch Fix, but it was a different one. And she had something really insightful to share on the topic of customer data. She said, when we were in our early stages, we would ask customers more information, more detailed information about them, and they were getting about a 25 to 30% response rate. It was really low, which was bad for her business because she was sending you clothes that you might like, but she says it was like shooting in the dark sometime. I might have known male, female, and small, medium, large, but not much more beyond that, and they really needed more information. She had an epiphany. She said, in one of their meetings when they were lamenting over not having enough response, she says, well, are we telling them why? Are we telling the customer why we're asking for the information? So the marketing and the digital team were like, we said to better serve you. She goes, no, tell them why. And so they changed their question to more be along the lines of, well, tell us about your sizes, your color preferences. And the reason we want to know this is so that we can give you things or send things to you that better fit your preferences, so that we can more thoughtfully market to you as you look through our catalogs. So just give us that more information and we'll have a better relationship. Response rate went up to about 65% after that. It was like overnight, and she has a very, very successful business now based on that. So what does this mean for retailers? The first thing that I talked about and I've been mentioning along the way is data. Data. So customer data is pretty obvious, right? You want to understand the preferences of customers, you want to understand transaction history, you want to understand their value, their lifetime value, you want to retain them. So customer value is a pretty clear one that you got to worry about. Another one is that would take another whole session to talk about would be supply chain. My comment on supply chain, besides the obvious of where's my goods and when can I sell it, it's important to know like what your inventory status is in now almost real time, right? You want to understand what's available to promise in a store. There's even some companies that are getting very creative with it, with really good supply chain information they're able to do more. It's a furniture company in the United States. Their supply chain information is so good that they can sell furniture while it's still on a container ship, because they know they leverage AI, artificial intelligence a lot in the supply chain. They know with a relative amount of certainty when that item is going to be able to be in that customer's home, so they can reflect that on the website. And they'll say, we don't have it today, but we'll have it to you in 20 days. Is that satisfactory? And again, it's about information. If you just tell the customer and they really like it, like furniture especially, they're willing to do that. They're willing to wait. The other piece that's really critical is agility. So you want to make sure that you're able to adopt the next big technology that comes along. If it's live stream was a great example. If you're operating on the VTEX platform, you're able to turn that on pretty quickly. Or if you leverage our tools, you can leverage it on a lot in other places too. But the key is to have not only the IT infrastructure to be able to be agile, but also the talent. You need to have the talent, the people in your organizations that know how to build and know how to architect things the right way. I'll tell you right now, I'm not the technical person. And so the next question is, well, gee, Doug, what's the best practices for building out my IT department and the way I think about how to architect for the future? And for that, I will hand it right off to Paul here.
Hey. All right, test. Thank you, Doug. So, hi everyone, my name's Paul Fryer. I'm the worldwide tech leader for retail at AWS. So that's essentially the CTO for the industry at AWS. And what I want to talk to you today about is a little bit more of the how would you go about creating a strategy, a framework, if you will, for moving to get some of those benefits Doug was talking about, like agility and velocity, and being able to deliver experiences across channels very quickly. So just a little bit of background, the retail industry is historically not a big investor in IT when compared with their peer industries. And this is a bit of an issue for a lot of companies that don't necessarily invest in a lot of cloud development talent. For example, there are some companies that do that, and they, like the Nikes of the world, they build a lot of their own things, but there's a big spectrum. And this is where we see a lot of companies needing help from platforms like VTEX. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you can leverage platforms so you don't have to build those things on your own. Another couple points here, what we're seeing and hearing, obviously everyone's hearing this, is the customer experience is what it's all about. And you want to excite customers, you want to have a differentiated, compelling experience that they come back for over and over, something they associate with your brand. And their disposable income keeps going up, so they're willing to try new things. Particularly in the pandemic, they were, loyal. They weren't as loyal. They were willing to try new things, go to new websites, experience new brands. So you really have to have a platform that's agile enough to deliver experiences to capture those customers and keep them around. So with that, I kind of want to share a mental model that we've put together based on feedback from real customers on how we're sort of seeing them think about their strategy with technology. And the main axis here is differentiation. And what I mean by that is, what makes your company particularly better or good at whatever you do that's not necessarily, so everything else that's undifferentiated would be things like storage, databases, even things like forecasting services is maybe not something that you want to be in the business of when you can just acquire that. So I'm going to go through this framework and talk a little bit about each layer so we can kind of unpack how we see a lot of customers thinking about their strategy for leveraging technology. So at the bottom layer, you've got things that are basically the least differentiating. That's your database, that's your storage, networking. I mean, every cloud provider has this. There's not too much that we see customers really wanting to be in the business here. So if we kind of click through that and go up one layer, this is just to acknowledge that everybody has technical debt, right? Like you've got an ERP system, you've got an order management system, and it's probably pretty sticky. It's going to stick around. So you need to have that as a part of your strategy that's very visible and real, because it's not going to go away anytime soon. We'll talk about how you can migrate off of that, but when you start, you need to acknowledge that it's there. The next part I want to talk about is, well, in this setting, we're calling these retail cloud specific services, because in Amazon we have 20 plus years of experience building scalable retail services, right? And so part of our roadmap in the AWS, the retail team specifically, is to keep releasing retail specific services. So an example is Amazon Forecast, which is a fully managed forecast service that you can use to do things like planning for inventory at a store level. Or Amazon Personalize, which is a fully managed personalization service that you can train, you can feed it events of your users, and it will produce recommendations for what they should be using online and in different channels. So we've been building these. A couple other examples are like fraud detection, and we've got a roadmap where we continue to build these. And we build these based on customer feedback. So we like one of the things we like to do in our team particularly is meet with customers and listen very closely. What are the things that are not differentiated that they would like to not be in the business of? And so sometimes they tell us, like, we don't want to be running our own order management system, or we don't want to be doing forecasting, or we don't want to, can you help us with this? And so we take a lot of feedback and bring all of AWS and sometimes parts of Amazon to build a long-term roadmap with customers. So this next layer that I want to talk about is, this is where things get a little different. This is where we start seeing or sort of suggesting that companies really take ownership of this layer, because this is your service layer, this is your API. And this is where you're able to implement standards that you want to use in your organization. And what I mean is like technical standards. So usually there's somebody who will have an opinion on, do I want to use OAuth for development with developers, or do I want to use REST, or do I want to use GraphQL? These are different like interfaces for your API. But that's where you can start to build your distinct capabilities of your business. And if you're a general retailer, that might be services like inventory, cart, checkout, recommendations. And this would be built in an enterprise standard that you control. And the reason you want to control that is so that you can plug into the best of breed, everything below there. So, you may start by having your service layer basically wrapping your existing ERP, your point of sale system, but you start exposing that out through a modern cloud-based API first type of model, which you can actually build across multiple regions. So if you're expanding, you have a consistent API that you can go to new markets in. But it also gives you the ability to pick certain functions over time that you want to take out of maybe your legacy software and then try new software from best-in-class providers. So if you want to experiment with personalization, you can actually do that change underneath the service layer and not impact the clients that are calling that layer from the top. And so here's a couple examples of just when we talk about information standards. So we see a lot of customers thinking about integration between clouds, between ERP systems. So there's movements like what should my eventing structure be? When you're sending payloads across systems, there's open source movements like cloud events that some of the clouds use and support. A lot of customers are looking at that. GraphQL is another modern sort of way to request information and receive information from a service endpoint that allows both mobile clients and desktop clients and other types of clients to use the same endpoint, so you don't have to keep building new services. And then there's like information standards that we see some of these taking traction in the industry. Okay, so the top layer is the one I want to talk about last, which is really where we think you should be developing the most of your effort. Is once you have your service layer in place, you want to be developing very compelling experiences through mobile, in store, online, through partners. And we see companies thinking about this layer differently. Sometimes they think, well, yeah, we're going to invest in our own employees, we're going to have them develop these because we have a consistent set of APIs that they can use. Or if we don't have the skill, like if it's a very specialized thing like a iOS development, they'll just hire a third party, but because they have implemented their API strategy, they have a way to give that third party credentials to develop on their platform. And so they can control who has access, and it's kind of like a marketplace model or an app store model where developers are able to use your APIs and then deliver experiences. So it's another way to scale. And one kind of technical example of this is in AWS, we use a meta language called Smithy. It's an open source kind of JSON-y type of model, but basically you define your service in a high level, and then it auto-generates the SDK. And an SDK is just a piece of code that allows you to interact with the API in a very simple way. So this is about accelerating the velocity that your application developers can do, because you are building SDKs that they can incorporate in their development environment very quickly. So they don't even necessarily need to know where the service is running or how it's built. All they need to know is how to interface with Java or Go or whatever programming language you're exposing that SDK in. So just a couple kind of tenets that we see among customers that go on one of these journeys is this is a little bit more of a cultural thing. Is like they tend to be very customer centric. Really, if you don't have a good signal on what your customers want, you need to be able to get that and work backwards from there. Being able to be lean and agile, deliver experiences quickly is like paramount. So really getting a DevOps pipeline that supports that. Usually that means a lot of investment in automation. It also means sort of education on engineering leaders so that they understand that when we want to do things like deliver daily. We're not going to wait for a month before we release code. Getting to that point really is like a daily basis. Loosely coupled, highly aligned is really just meaning, there are standards that go across your service layer, and then individual teams should be able to have an opinion on how they build their domain services. So if there's a team of engineers working on the checkout service, they should be able to use whatever language they want. At least that's one philosophy. Not every company is like that. Some are more opinionated on the underlying implementation. But at Amazon, we do give developers a lot of flexibility on what they use for the implementation. And then being product driven, sort of the product mindset is really around thinking about your capabilities, your business capabilities as products. So you want to have the discipline that like a real SaaS company would have around that in terms of your service level availability, how quickly your APIs respond. Those things will actually be differentiators to the experience for customers in a digital first world, because all your experiences will just be more faster, more reliable, and more available globally. So I want to talk a little bit about how we see people kind of thinking about the difference between innovation and integration, particularly in headless commerce. So I'm going to put up 4 different models here we can kind of look at. With the first one that came in being commercial off-the-shelf e-commerce suites. So that's like something that doesn't have a lot of control, but you can get it up and running pretty easy. But you're not going to be able to do a lot of customization of it. It's kind of whatever you get in the box is what you get. So it's a low innovation, but low integration efforts. And then we see like the custom built on top of a monolith, which is not really what you want, because it's you can't innovate on it. It's very hard to innovate, and it's very high integration costs. So if we move up, custom built microservices is, well, because they're custom, you have a lot of control over them. So you can do whatever you want, but the integration, if you're running your own microservices and maybe everything underneath it, is just an acknowledgement that you're going to have to manage all of that. And so the sort of sweet spot, if you will, that some companies are coming around to is, we want to have that top layer in the model be controlled by us or third parties, and then we want to use best-in-class headless commerce platforms like VTEX, for example, and leverage everything VTEX is bringing with their retail services, with their domain industry knowledge, and just run on top of that and build and focus on building our experiences that way. And you may pick and choose some of VTEX, maybe some of something else, but with that service layer on top, you have the ability to sort of control your destiny and change things out over time as you want. So just a couple ideas on how do you get started with a strategy like this? How do you do it? Well, you want to think about your strategy, to kind of map it out. Where are you at? Think about what systems you have in those different parts of the framework, and start to, if you're thinking like, well, if I want to go down this microservice route and do domain services, and you don't know where to start, think about starting with your shopping cart. Because if your shopping cart is having scalability issues, which we do see with customers, you may want to look at a more scalable, NoSQL, maybe managed, high scale, proper database for that type of traffic. And you could have a team that goes out and does that as a proof of concept and start to compare your existing shopping cart service with the new one that you're using a more purpose-built database for, as an example. We could certainly talk about a lot of other examples. We are going to be at the AWS booth, so we'd love to talk to you guys more. This is just a little example of some of the retail customers we work with globally. So with that, I think we are at the end, and I'd like to thank you all for attending. Are we doing questions?